I think the biggest difference for me is that elite salespeople don't really sell anything. They are masters at getting people to sell themselves. Getting your buyer to feel uncomfortable is actually a trait of good salespeople. People buy off emotion and then they back that up with their own logic. You don't ever want to convince anybody to buy from you. You want people to make their own decisions. You're just helping them along that journey. I think questions in sales are more important than answers. Just being the nicest salesperson that I speak to doesn't always win you the deal. You don't sell the gym membership, you sell the six-pack. Sell the outcomes, not the features.
Welcome back to the Success Clues podcast. This podcast is called Success Clues because success leaves clues. And the best way to achieve your goals is to find people who have already achieved them and get the blueprint. Every episode is strategically planned to break down specific strategies that the top entrepreneurs are using. No fluff, just practical tips to get you from A to B faster. Remember, normal people learn from their mistakes, stupid people already have the answers, and smart people learn from others. Today I'm joined by a good friend of mine, an absolute legend, Francis Manton, who has spent 15 years in sales and now coaches founders to become top 1% sellers. We're going to be diving into the exact frameworks that you can use to increase your conversion rate and sign more clients. If you're trying to grow your business or are struggling to get deals over the line, this is going to be a masterclass in getting them done. We're going to be talking through the exact frameworks you can use, the mindset of elite salespeople, and some common mistakes that Francis sees in salespeople. Before we jump in, I wanted to give a huge shout out to Scripe, who sponsor this podcast. Now, I actually approached Scripe to sponsor the podcast because I'm such a big fan of the tool they've built. Scripe is an all-in-one LinkedIn content assistant that will even build your strategy for you. It's like having a strategist, a content writer, and an analyst in your pocket. I use it to save 10 hours every week when I'm creating content. First, I review my content performance using their in-depth analytics, which neatly shows me what content types are performing the best. Then I use their inspiration feature to find viral posts from other creators which will inspire my own. And whenever I have ideas, I upload recordings of my calls I've had with my team, personal voice notes, or even YouTube videos I've created. And this is where Scripe is worth its weight in gold. It's analyzed all of my previous content to get my tone down to a T. And then it uses the sources I've shared to write engaging and optimized content. And for just £1.16 a day, it is an absolute no-brainer. Click the link in the show notes to get 20% off your first month. Thank you, Scribe. So, Francis, what is the number one difference between the top 1% salespeople and the rest?
I think the biggest difference for me is that elite salespeople don't really sell anything. They are masters at getting people to sell themselves. I think, an average salesperson tends to lean far too heavily on features, benefits, and their differentiators to their competition, and that puts them almost like in a convincer mode, and therefore they're trying to persuade their buyers to buy from them. Whereas elite salespeople just ask much better questions which lead the buyer into making their own conclusion or coming to their own conclusion and essentially walking themselves into the sale.
So if I was running, let's say I run like an online program or an agency, I'm obviously selling people a lot of the time, what would selling the features and benefits look like, and how does that differ from questioning people in the right way to get them to sell themselves?
So I think if you take, for example, if you say something like, what made you even want to explore a solution like this in the first place? A lot of people wouldn't ask that question, but what you're doing is you're getting them to admit that they have a need for change. Yeah, I think another question might be, if there was a fit, what essentially would that look like? So they're giving you the buying criteria. So really it's just about strategic questions to get them to open up and essentially walk themselves into that sale, rather than, explaining, why you're better, cheaper, faster, or why your quality is better than somebody else's.
Do you ever ask a question and feel a little bit uncomfortable when you ask that question?
Sometimes I do. I've kind of got used to it over the years. But I think getting your buyer to feel uncomfortable is actually a trait of good salespeople. I think a lot of buyers don't necessarily know how to buy, and you have to kind of get them out of their comfort zone and get them to see your way of thinking and reframe essentially what's happening in the sales scenario in order to get them to come around to your side. So part of that is making your buyer uncomfortable in certain scenarios and getting them to admit that they have problems and that they haven't faced those problems, and that essentially sets you up as the logical solution for them to move forward.
Mm-hmm. You said something interesting there, which was the logical solution. What's the right balance between, like, because obviously people say you need to be selling emotionally and people buy emotionally. I don't think that's entirely true. I think especially in B2B there is a huge logical element as well. How do you balance like the logic and the emotion of selling?
Well, I think people say, don't they? They say people buy off emotion and then they back that up with their own logic. So I agree. I do agree with that statement. I think you have to get people to feel the pain of their problem at the moment and amplify that pain. And when you can do that, then it basically sets you up it sets your solution up as the logical next step to basically counteract that pain. So in answer to your question, emotion is important, but I don't think you can just sell on emotion. You have to have the logic as well.
Yeah, that makes sense. What are some other traits of elite salespeople? So they get people to sell themselves. Is there anything else that elite salespeople do that most people don't think about?
I think outcome independence or like indifference is a good trait of a salesperson. So not worrying about the outcome of the situation, just focusing on the inputs. I think that puts them in the right kind of mindset to sell to somebody. When you go into a deal feeling like you need it, it puts you on the back foot and it puts you in a position of where you have to basically convince someone to buy from you. But you don't ever want to convince anybody to buy from you. You want people to make their own decisions. You're just helping them along that journey. So outcome independence is one. A trait that served me well in sales is saying to myself, literally in the mirror sometimes before a sales call is, you don't need this sale. You'd like it to close for sure, but you don't actually need it. And I think that just kind of puts you in the right headspace to actually be able to sell to that person. So indifference is one. I think we touched on it earlier, but being able to ask really good questions, strategic questions. I think questions in sales are more important than answers. So if people were to go away and try and refine their sales approach, I think they should focus on the questions that they're answering rather than like rebuttals to certain objections. And then I think another trait as well is being able to challenge your buyers. I think a lot of people fall into the trap of almost agreeing with everything that they say and not wanting to cause any sort of friction in that scenario because they want them on their side and they want to ultimately get a yes from them. But if you're able to challenge your buyer and actually say something like, look, I can understand why you might think that, but I'd like to challenge that, I'd like to challenge that opinion that you have, or, I can understand why you would think that, but that's actually not the case in this scenario, and let me explain why. That does wonders to kind of build your authority and your status in the deal, and it gets people on your side. So I guess to kind of summarize, it's outcome independence, being indifferent about the end result, wanting the deal to close, but not necessarily needing it to close, and asking great questions rather than just answering questions. And then finally, being able to challenge your buyer in a professional manner.
Does being liked matter?
I think being liked does matter. I think the best salespeople are able to do all of what I just said, but then also sprinkle in a bit of being likability on top. I think it's not the be all and end all. You don't want to be too nice to your prospects. I think that's a trap that I kind of fell into early on in my sales career. I was trying to be the nicest person on the sales call, but I realized, quite quickly that just being the nicest salesperson that I speak to doesn't always win you the deal. So I think if you can demonstrate your expertise, have authority in the situation, but also be able to build rapport and sprinkle a bit of likability on top, then you're in a sort of a winning scenario.
Yeah. And for a salesperson or maybe a founder that's playing the salesperson in their business, they're playing that role.
Yeah.
If they're speaking to a prospect who maybe is considering multiple different providers. Let's say they're talking to multiple different companies who could solve that problem for them. What are some of the things you could do in that scenario to essentially win them over to you or bias them towards choosing you rather than going with a competitor, where presumably, let's say for the sake of this argument, like the features of the product are the same, the outcomes you generate are the same, the positioning is roughly similar?
Yeah, so my immediate sort of thought on that is being able to have the bigger picture conversation. And what I mean by that is if everybody's just talking about features, benefits, and, price and, why they're better than the other person, everybody sounds the same. And so you can't really differentiate yourself. And so if you're able as a salesperson to speak to a founder or speak to whoever it is that you're selling to and tie your solution into their bigger picture. So whatever their goals are for 3, 6, 5 years down the line, if you're now talking about how your solution fits with their bigger picture, then that kind of differentiates you, in my opinion.
And does that change depending on who you're selling to? Because I ask this purely from a selfish point of view. In the last week, I've sold to people at CEO level, like executive level, run the business, own the business themselves. And I've sold to people that are in a head of marketing or a head of strategy type role who don't have the final say in the company. They don't have ownership in the company. They're not the invoice payer, so to speak, and they're buying on behalf of maybe their senior team. Does it change how you would approach sales?
I think it does change slightly. It's not bigger picture in the sense that like the company vision, but what about them in their department? And, what about them within their role? I think it does change slightly, but not drastically.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So you talk about how top 1% salespeople get people to sell themselves. I want to talk through the steps that we can actually take for the listeners, for example, to actually get people to sell themselves. Like tangibly, how do you do that? What does it start with?
Well, I think there's two ways that you can look at this, or there's not two ways you can look at it. There's two elements to this, right? There's the kind of like the macro and the micro. The macro is the sales process itself. So the buyer journey. So the point from somebody being a prospect all the way through to them being your client. That's the macro side of things. And then the micro side of things is the actual on the sales call, right? The framework that you run through when you're selling to somebody. So to cover the macro or first, the sales process, for me, I find that all deals follow the same process. Now, that can be over a long period of time. It depends on who you're selling to, what you're selling. So SaaS sales, for example, it could be over months. Whereas high ticket sales, where you're selling like a 10K coaching package, that could be over, the course of a day or two. But all of them tend to follow the same sort of structure or has the same sort of 5 stages in some way, shape or form. The first one is prospecting. So you need leads to speak to, right? So whether that's outbound, inbound, or organic, whatever you're doing, you need people to actually speak to you. One thing I'll say on prospecting is that all of the best salespeople that I've ever come across always do their own prospecting. They don't just rely solely on inbound. They'll also do their own prospecting as well. I think some people advance in their sales career and they think it's kind of below them, but the best salespeople are always, getting new leads to speak to. So prospecting, the next stage is some kind of discovery phase or diagnosis phase. So that's where you're on the call and you're establishing whether they have a problem that you can fix and whether you're the person to be able to fix it. After discovery comes some kind of demo or some kind of offer or solution stage where you're tailoring your offer and showing them how you can actually help them solve their problem and tying your process back to their specific problems. After demo or after that kind of offer is the close, where you go for the close. It's pretty self-explanatory. And then after close is like aftercare. So, where you're asking for referrals and actually handing that off.
I imagine the bit where that's the bit most people completely forget to do.
A lot of people, it's a whole revenue stream that you're just completely ignoring.
Yeah.
So that's the macro side. On the micro side, it's actually on the sales call. So what do we do when, we've done everything else up to that stage, now we're on the call. How do we actually run that call?
And is this the discovery call or is this the demo call?
It's usually the discovery. Now, like I said earlier, sales cycles are different, right? So this whole process could happen in one call, or this process could happen over 10, 12 months. It really does vary, and there's a lot of nuance that you have to kind of consider here when you're kind of thinking about these things. So I'm not saying that there's, a perfect solution. It really does depend, but this is kind of like the patterns that I see in sales. So on the discovery call, I mean, there's so many different frameworks that you can follow, so many different frameworks that are out there, BANT selling, med pick selling. I won't go into them, but the one that I think is most simple and one that I like to follow is actually from Alex Hormozi, regardless of what you think of him. But he's got a framework called the closer framework, which is, I just think it follows a really nice formula in terms of being able to sell to people. So it's an acronym for how you run your call. So first stage is C, which is clarify the problem or clarify why they're here. So somebody is on this call. If it's an inbound lead, they're on the call for a reason. So they've created, they've pressed the button. They're on the call because they responded to some kind of call to action. So they've responded to an ad, they've booked in a call. So you kind of have to clarify while they're here, make them justify why you're on the conversation or why you're having a conversation with them in the first place. That's the C. L is to label the problem. So once you're able to get them to clarify why they're here, you have to kind of get them to own the fact that they have a problem to solve in the first place. A lot of problems that salespeople sort of run into is that their buyers don't actually admit that they have a problem that needs solving. So L is to kind of get them to label that problem.
Instantly, I'm noticing here, even in the first two steps, the way you're positioning this is really, really interesting. You're almost framing yourself as the authority straight away, rather than letting them dictate the call. It sounds like you're really set on you setting the agenda, almost you being the one that's asking the questions from the off. Is that important for getting the status game in sales right?
Absolutely. I should have said that at the start. I mean, I think I've said already that buyers don't know how to buy, and so you have to control the sales cycle, essentially. If you're the salesperson, you know what the next steps are, and so you have to lead your buyer into those stages. I think if there's no clear structure, if there's no formula for them to follow or no path or journey for them to follow, then buyers get confused, and confused buyers will never buy. So it's down to you as a salesperson to manage that and always be pushing them towards the next step and pushing them along that sales cycle. So absolutely, it's super important to own that.
And what do you do if, I'm sure everyone's had it before, your prospect gets on the call and instantly they're trying to take control and they say, talk me through how you work with your clients. What do you do in that scenario if they do get in there first and they ask that question?
Yeah, so I mean, that's the frame game, right? It's about, trying to control the frame. You're always going to get some people who want to take the frame from you, but it comes back to kind of challenging them slightly. So if somebody gets on the call and they say to you, look, I just want to know what the price is. Tell me what the price is. I think in that scenario, some people will tell you, I think incorrectly, to just ignore it and say, look, I can't tell you the price until I know exactly what you need. But I think in those scenarios, when you're dealing with that kind of person, just ignoring it isn't going to serve you well. You have to kind of give them something to work with. So I would say something like, look, typically to work with us, it costs somewhere between 5 and 15K, for example. Obviously, that depends entirely on, what your requirements are and where you are at the moment. And so if I can get a little bit more context out of you, then, I'm happy to kind of walk you through what that looks like for yourself. But it's constantly trying to put the pressure of answering back onto the buyer. I think if somebody gives you an objection, a lot of amateur salespeople will essentially just answer that objection. They'll go straight to features and benefits and they'll try and just handle it there and then. But a lot of the time what somebody's objecting to is not the real problem. It's a smokescreen. And therefore you have to kind of clarify it first. You can't overcome an objection if you don't clarify it first. So I will always push back and try and get them to clarify exactly what it is that they're objecting to before I actually go ahead and try and handle that.
Yeah, super. So we've got the C and the L.
So O is overview of their past efforts, which is the next stage. So what have they tried so far? What have they tried to implement? Why hasn't that worked? Get them to own the fact that they have tried to do this themselves already and it hasn't essentially worked. And that's essentially leading them to the fact that they need some sort of outside help in order to, solve the problem that they're facing. S is to sell the outcome, not the features. So, it's a bit of a soundbite, but people say, you don't sell the six pack, or you don't sell the gym membership, you sell the six pack, right? Or you sell the feeling of walking down the beach with, a six pack, or you don't sell a plane ticket, you sell the feeling of, sitting on the beach with a pina colada. So sell the outcome, not the actual benefit. Nobody cares about the plane ticket, but they care about being on holiday. So that is the S. E is to explain their concerns. So at that point, there are going to be certain concerns that you have to overcome. And then finally R, which is reinforce and close. So reinforce the value, use their own words against them in the sense that you said this was a priority. So are you kind of, ready to move this forward and we can get this signed today. So clarify why they're here, label the problem, overview of the past efforts, sell the outcomes, not the features, explain their concerns, and then reinforce and close.
Is there a certain amount of time you should be spending doing this? Is there any way to know maybe you're not spending enough time in a certain area, or does that actually not matter? It depends on the context of the call.
It definitely depends on the context of the call and your sales cycle and like the processes of where they're up to, or what's happened up to that point. I think one mistake that I see a lot of salespeople, or a trap that a lot of salespeople fall into, and it's actually something that I fell into very early on in my career as well. I think it's quite common, is just not digging anywhere deep enough. I think a lot of people will ask a question, get the answer, and then move on, but they don't peel the onion in that sense. They don't get to those deeper layers of what's forcing or what's driving the need for change in the first place. And if you can get to that bottom layer, that gives you the ammunition that you can then use against them, ethically of course, but to close the deal later on.
Yeah, ethically is probably an important term here, because throughout this whole thing we're presuming we're selling something that is going to improve their lives. They just don't realize it yet, or as you said, they don't know how to buy. For me, that's been a huge unlock in how I've sold, is actually reframing a product in my mind as like, this is the thing that helps them, right? I imagine that must be pretty important for top 1% salespeople, is to actually be selling a product that is going to deliver a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm not a fan at all of selling, for the sake of selling or just selling to everybody. They have to qualify. They have to be a qualified lead, and they have to actually, get some benefit from your solution or your service. I don't agree with, pushing people pushing people into a corner and, almost selling them in, or submitting them into a sell. But yeah, you're totally right. It has to be something that you believe in, and it has to be something that can actually add value to their life.
Where do you see people making mistakes within the closer framework? Is there a particular section where you see most salespeople are going wrong?
I think not necessarily. I think what I touched on earlier about not digging deep enough, I think that is probably the main thing that I see in sales calls of people, of why people struggle, is because they don't get the full context. They don't get the full nuance of somebody's situation. And so if I could give one piece of advice, it's really just to dig deeper, ask a question, follow up with another question, sometimes follow up with another question on that related point. And then every time that you do that, underscore it all by basically saying, okay, so what I'm hearing is this then. You want X, you can't do it because of Y, and this or Z is going to help you with this solution. So yeah, ask a question, follow up, and then underscore it.
And but that underscoring is really important, right? Because by doing that, are you showing them the understanding? Is that why you're doing it?
Correct, yeah. So if you're able to articulate somebody's pain or somebody's situation better than they are, then they feel understood. And when somebody feels understood and they think, fuck, this guy really gets me, essentially they want to work with you at that point. And I think that's a problem, or that's a skill, essentially, that some people just don't have.
Was it you that gave me the 20% talk time rule? I feel like this was you.
Could have been. It could have been.
I think it was you. So for listeners, if it was you, let's say it was you, I think it was, told me to keep talk time below 20% or below. That's been a huge game changer in asking the right questions and asking enough questions.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you've got to get them doing the talking, right? If you're the one doing all the talking, then how can you understand their situation? There's lots of softwares that you can use out there, like Gong, Fathom, or whatever, but they give you data on your talk time. And when I first started using those, I thought, man, I'm talking way too much. And I think a lot of people have that problem because they're just so enthusiastic and they obviously want to close a deal. But if you can just embrace the silence and just ask a lot of questions and get them talking, it serves you well in sales for sure. So yes, in answer to your question, about 20-30% talk time worked.
Having that Fathom pop up telling me where my talk time has been absolute game changer.
Fathom is a game changer. I would recommend everybody use it. Yeah, I absolutely love it.
Do you know what I realized about Fathom recently as well? No affiliation to Fathom whatsoever, by the way. It's worth saying. I just use the product and it's great.
Yeah.
Is obviously the note taking is one of the main features. You can actually change the settings on the note taker for certain sales methodologies.
Yes, I've seen that.
It's absolute gold.
So you can essentially upload your sales methodology into Fathom, and it kind of walks you through it on the call.
Yeah, gold. Are there any other tools that you use in the sales process throughout that whole like macro journey that you talked about?
I mean, I like Loom a lot. I like to send videos to my prospects, so just very short videos rather than sending them, long emails explaining context or whatever. I will basically just run them through a very quick video. They can watch it on 2x speed, and that seems to land really well because people get the nuance and you can kind of get yourself across on a video. So Loom is one. There is another software called Win.ai as well, which is similar to Fathom, but it's much more like sales focused. So actually it almost tells you on the call, you didn't ask this, or dig a little bit deeper here. So that's a good software mainly for B2B. But other than that, I'm a big fan really of getting people on the call where they're almost 80% sold. So a lot of your sort of pre-call process should be warming your client up or warming your prospect up, handling objections before they even jump on the call. They should know exactly, how your offer works, what your pricing is. And by that point, when they jump on the call, they're 80% sold, and you're essentially just getting them over the line for that last 20% rather than having to educate them on stuff that they should already know before they actually get to the call. So with me working with a lot of founders, in the last year or so, that's what I'm introducing to their sales process.
So tactically, how are you doing that? Is that where you're like sending the looms? Is that what you're using looms for? Or?
Not necessarily. It's more like, okay, somebody books a call, what happens straight away? So instantly they get redirected to a landing page, which has got various videos on what their offer does, educates the client, is essentially a myth-busting page and handles any objections that they might have. Then the next day they might get a tailored case study. Somebody that's been in their position before and how we handled it, and just stuff like that, so that by the time that they get to the call, they've got a really good idea of who you are and how you can help them, and therefore you're not spending like 80% of the call teaching them about why they might need this solution and how you can essentially help them. It's really just focusing on them and their situation and getting them over the line.
We have something similar in our highest conversion rate comes when people have watched a video that explains our model before the call.
Yeah,
because they think like you, right? You don't have to do the whole like convincing that your model's right.
Totally. And this is something that I see a lot of people have huge benefit from, or take huge benefit from, is their close rate and their show up rate increases dramatically when you have a pre-call process, which basically warms up your prospect, and you're not overwhelming them. You're not, I see some, influencers out there or sales influencers talking about, hammering them with sales messages and text messages and every single platform. That's not my approach. I like to just be a little bit more subtle. But if you can hit them, say, today's Monday and we've got a call on Thursday, if you can hit them with a piece of content every single day, which is, related to their specific scenario, essentially warms them up, then, they're going to show up to that call basically ready to buy.
Yeah. Do you think if you had a really good pre-call process and a great product, you could convert at 50% plus, even if you're an average salesperson?
Yes, I think marketing can do a lot of the work for you. And you essentially, some of the offers that I work on, or some of the businesses that I work with, the salespeople have essentially become order takers because they are the buyers are just so warmed up. And that's because, the founder does a very good job in terms of like their personal branding and the content that they put out as well. But the process in terms of once they actually get onto the call, the salesperson is just kind of getting it over the line. What was the second part of that question I think you asked?
Can you sell it 50% plus conversion rates, even if you're average.
I think if you're at 50% conversion rate, then you need to up your prices. I think for me, if you're closing somewhere around about 30 to 35%, that's when you should think about, okay, we could maybe up our price a little bit here at this point. Yeah.
Interesting. Where's the point where you go, something's wrong with our sales process? Like what conversion rate? Because presumably 5% would be too low.
Well, I think like a perfect sort of a perfect sort of rate is around about 30 to 35%. So if you're under that, that means something needs to change. You need to get up to that rate. I think if you're over that, then you probably need to, up your prices. And I think around about 30 to 35% is like a good close rate.
That's so interesting. I've always just thought that get your conversion rate as high as you possibly can.
Which is ideal, but I think you're leaving money on the table if you do that.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously there are scenarios if you're just getting started in business and you need case studies or what have you, then obviously reduce your prices and get the wins.
Yeah.
But I think if you're closing anything above sort of 35 to 40%, I think you should probably up your prices. Super
interesting. Are there any other specific pieces of sales psychology that you use to get clients over the line? Maybe the stuff that the layperson maybe wouldn't notice if they were watching a sales call.
I think amplifying the pain is a big one. We kind of touched on that earlier, but if you're able to quantify somebody's pain, I think that stands you in good stead. A lot of people know they've kind of got a problem, but they don't really know what it's costing them. So if you're able to say, look, you're closing at, you're closing 2 out of 10 deals, that's costing you, your close rate is what, like 10% or something like that. That's costing you about 40K a month. Over a year, that's probably what, $500,000 that you're losing out. And then they're thinking, oh shit, like I'm losing, $500,000 because of this problem. But they've never actually probably thought of it in those terms. So if you're able to actually amplify the pain where they can see, okay, this is a big problem that we need to get solved, that's a big thing. In terms of other sort of psychological sort of levers that you can pull, I think using their own words against them. This is why the questioning is so important at the start, because if somebody is saying to you, this is just a huge priority, we've got to get this solved, and I need to get this fixed, they're not going to then turn around and say to you, like, I need to go away and think about this. So using their own words against them. And then I think the other one is kind of positioning yourself as a bridge. So rather than just being an option, a lot of people are out there just kind of, comparing options of different vendors. Rather than just being one of those options, you have to kind of position yourself as that bridge. So here's where you are now, here's what you want to, where you want to be, and this is how we help you get there. I always say, like, a good analogy is if somebody's house is on fire and you offer them a fire extinguisher, they're not going to say, I need to go away and think about it. Or if they're broken down on the motorway and you're offering them a lift, they're not going to say, let me go away and think about it. So positioning yourself as that bridge is super important, I think.
Yeah. I imagine a lot of people as well struggle with that, like the final part of the framework of actually getting the deal done, getting it over the line and getting the cash in the bank, basically, because a deal is never done, I don't think, until you see the money in the account. Is there anything you do to make sure that you can actually transition smoothly from, yes, we've had a good conversation, you understand their pains, where they're going, you've positioned yourself as the bridge. How do you actually get them saying yes and making the payment? Yeah,
good question. I think firstly, your point there, the deal is never done until it's done. I've made that mistake in the past. I've spent the commission before I've actually had it in the bank. So, don't celebrate too early. But in terms of actually closing, I think a lot of people focus on this a little bit too much. I think they think that it's the most important part of the sales cycle. And of course it's important because, what's the point? Otherwise, you've got to close the deal. But I always say that if you've done discovery correctly and if you've diagnosed their pain properly, closing just becomes kind of natural. It becomes like a natural next step for them. It's the logical, path for them to take. And so there shouldn't really be a huge amount of friction at that point. I think if you're getting major objections when it comes to close, it means that you've done something wrong earlier on in the sales cycle. So if you're like, any sort of friction that you come across there should really just be minor sort of logistical concerns that they might have. That being said, in terms of actually getting the deal done, I'd like to just do a summary close or just directly ask them, we've covered X, Y, and Z. It looks like, this is the logical next step for you. If you're ready to move forward, I can have the invoice ready for you today, and we can have you onboarded next week. Does that work for you? I just, directly ask for the sell. I think a lot of people are frightened. They kind of want their buyer to tell them, I'm ready to go forward, but you have to just ask sometimes and push people over the line.
I wouldn't know, but I presume it's like dating, or
Me either.
or asking someone out. You do all the chivalry beforehand, but ultimately you've got to actually ask someone out, surely, to get a date, right?
Correct.
Must be similar.
I think people are frightened of that. They're frightened of, actually asking for the sell. I think the other side of this as well is just kind of assuming the sell. So, if you've done a really good job of controlling the sales cycle, putting the buyer through this, this buying journey, then you can almost just like assume, where you're just, the language that you're using is like, once we've got you onboarded, we'll do X, Y, and Z. We'll have the invoice paid by, Friday, then we can have you sort of, onboarded on Monday, Tuesday next week. And you're just kind of taking control, and some buyers will appreciate that, because they're kind of, as I said earlier, they're being, led to their solution.
Mm. I'm going to throw some objections at you. This should be quite fun. Some scenarios, some objections, because I want to see how you might handle them.
Okay. Before we do, though, I think we should give nuance in the sense that, there is no one size fits all answer, and there's no like, if I answer any objections, it's not like this is the way to do it. It's just, a way that, has worked for me. And it really does depend on, what you're selling and who you're selling to.
Lots of ways to do this. These ones have just worked for Francis. I trust them. So, okay. Prospect takes control of the call early on, and basically I've kind of asked this one already, but they're saying, how does it work? What does it cost? And they're trying to structure the conversation themselves.
Yeah, so you've got to take back control in that scenario. I think, as I said earlier, you can't just ignore the fact that they want to hear the price early. A lot of these people will be sort of high-level executives who are going to try and be in that scenario. They're going to try and take frame and take control early, but you have to push back. So I would give them an indication of the price. Typically it's between X and Y to work with us, but I can't give you a proper price until we actually have the full context. So I've got questions to ask right now. Once I have that context, I can guide you on exactly what it's going to cost.
Nice, like it. Prospect asks, what makes you different to the competition?
Okay, so when it comes to competition, really you've got to understand exactly what it is that they're comparing you. So I would ask something like, but I'm happy to answer that question, but before I ask, what exactly is it that you're comparing us? Is it price? Is it speed of implementation? Is it quality? And get them answering back to you. So rather than you just, reeling off a list of features and benefits, you ask the question of, what exactly is it that you're comparing? Because now they're going to tell you exactly what's important to them. And you can follow up with a question saying, okay, and out of those three things, what is it that's most important to you? Because again, you're putting the pressure of answering back onto them, and they're giving you the ammunition that you need, rather than you just saying, oh, we're the cheapest option, we do it in the quickest, time frame, we can add extra onboarding hours for you, or whatever it might be. Rather than just answering the question, you're getting them to give you the ammunition.
They almost answer the question themselves.
Correct. And this is what I mean about asking good questions in order to get people to sell themselves.
Yeah, love it. Probably the most annoying one. Prospect says, I need to think about it.
Okay, so I need to think about it is a symptom of poor questioning earlier on in the call. Like I said earlier, if somebody's house is on fire and you offer them a fire extinguisher, they're not going to say, I need to think about it. So you need to create that dynamic in the sales cycle or in the sales call in order for that to not happen. But if it does happen, if it does slip through the net, then I think there's two sort of ways that you can go about it. The first one is just a direct approach and just asking them, yeah, look, totally understand that you need to go away and think about it. But before we jump off the call, do you mind if I just ask you a quick question? And if you say before we jump off the call, they think they're leaving the call, so that you've given them an out, and therefore they're just going to say, yeah, of course, what's the question? And at that point you can say, well, what exactly is it that you need to think about? Usually, typically, when somebody tells me that they need to think about it, it's usually because they don't trust me, or they don't believe in the quality of the service, or that we can actually get them the results, or it's because of price. So is it any of those things, or am I completely off the mark here? And what you're doing there is you're giving them kind of safe options, or you're giving them the space to actually surface what the problem is. And you can handle it there and then. So that's kind of like a direct approach. And then there's also a bit more of a strategic approach for buyers who are a little bit more guarded. You can say, look, absolutely, of course, I understand that you need to go away and think about it. Before you do, like, what exactly is it that you need to go away and think about it, just so that I know for when we meet next time, I can have the information ready for you.
So good. Similar one, but it might be a slightly different response. I need to speak to my business partner or spouse or
the spouse objection,
CFO.
yeah. Or partner objection, yeah. I mean, again, ideally, you wouldn't be in this situation because your sales cycle would have all of the key stakeholders on the call. And so that you're selling to exactly who is making the decision. But obviously, you can't have that in every scenario. I think in this scenario, I would firstly try and clarify what the role of their partner is. So you can say something like, no problem, like when you go away and speak to them, is it more of an FYI, like you just need to kind of let them know, or do you actually need to go and get their approval? And if you ask it like that, they'll think, okay, actually, I don't really need their approval. I've got decision-making authority here, and essentially you're questioning why they need to go away and speak to their partner. So the other thing to do here as well is to always book a follow-up call. So this is a big mistake that I see from a lot of salespeople, is they let people give them objections and they just kind of let them into this black hole, and they don't control the process. So if I can't get a decision out of somebody on a call, I will always be booking up follow-up calls. So I'll say, let's get 15 minutes in the diary in 2 days' time. Let's get your partner on the call as well. Send them the Fathom recording in between so they can have the full context, and then look to make a decision on that call there and then.
That has been a game changer for us, because at least you're getting a decision then.
Yeah.
I feel like if you don't have that call booked in, there's a good chance you're never hearing back from that person ever again.
Totally. I mean, if it's not in the calendar, it's not happening. Nobody is just going to come back to you. I mean, it's very rare that somebody's going to be like, okay, I'm ready to move forward now. You're just going to be stuck in this cycle of just following up and chasing people all of the time. So that's why I'm a big believer in just getting a decision. I think that the only thing worse in sales than a no is a slow no. So just a yes or a no, but make sure that you have that follow-up booked.
If a prospect doesn't close on the call,
yeah,
let's presume for this sake, for whatever reason, you've not managed to get the next call in. Mm-hmm. There's no next meeting in the diary, and then they do start going to you.
Yeah.
Is there any fix, or is that gone?
I think it's basically gone. But there are a few things that you can do to kind of revive that. So the first one would be is actually calling it out. So via email, via text, or whatever it is that whatever medium, that you're speaking to them. I would just literally be direct and call it out. Look, when I don't hear from people, it's usually because of A, B, or C. Is it the case here? Just the goal, what you're trying to do here is just reopen dialogue. You're not trying to close them or sell them. You're just trying to get them speaking back to you. So that's the first thing that I would do. If you struggle with that, then there is kind of like a last resort where you're just essentially pulling it away from them. So you say, look, I haven't heard from you, so I assume that you're all set for whatever it is that your solution is. I'm going to close this down. If things change, then let me know. I think in that scenario, it's kind of there's nothing to lose in that scenario. They're not engaging with you, so if it can just sometimes get them to re-engage because they think that they're losing something and they think, oh shit, I need to get back to that guy. So,
and how often should you be following up? Are you sending this like a week after? Or are you sending it a month after?
It depends on the scenario. It depends on, what it is that you're selling. Again, if you're selling software sales, you don't want to be calling them every single day. It's a long sales cycle. So it really is, there is a lot of nuance. It really is dependent on the situation that you're in. I follow up generally, 5-6 times. But I'd like to think that I'm good enough to not be in a position where I have to. I just get the decision, even if it's a no, or a no for now.
Final one then. Prospect isn't actually looking to buy now. They're looking to just explore options for later down the line. Maybe they say, not ready to do this now, but we might do it in January.
Mm-hmm. I think exploring options, I wouldn't even bother with the call. So, I mean, I'd be on the call. Obviously, you have to kind of engage with them. But I think this is slightly controversial. I've had some kickback from this before, but I'm not there to educate you. I am there to solve real problems that you're facing right now. So I would kick the can down the road in that scenario. And if they, if you can't get them to establish that they actually have a problem that needs solving right now, then you're just kind of wasting your time. I don't want to be telling you why you should think about doing this. So I would say something like, look, I think, it's clear to me that this isn't really a priority for you right now. I can send you over some information. And I think when you're ready to actually discuss this, implementing this or, solving this specific problem, then we can talk then.
You might be the coolest guy in sales, you.
Why?
I just like the authority that you operate with.
Well, that one gets a bit of kickback because people are like, oh, you just lost a lead. And it's like, well, my time is limited and I want to focus on the highest leverage deals, right? I want to speak to people that have a problem and have a problem that I know that I can fix. I don't want to be educating somebody on why I think that they should think that they've got a problem. You shouldn't be. I think you shouldn't even be on a call with that person if they're exploring options for, a year's time.
Seems like you have an abundance mindset as well, in that there's another lead coming, right? I'm doing my prospecting, so I know I'm going to have another lead.
Absolutely. I think that's another trait of an elite salesperson. They know that sales is full of peaks and troughs. It's a roller coaster, and yeah, there's always a conversation to be had. And if they focus on the inputs, then overall they're going to win. It's always going to go up and to the right. It's full of ups and downs, but over the long run, it's up and to the right.
Yeah, love it. Awesome. To wrap us up, then I'm going to give you a load of common sales hacks, frameworks, things that people are advising.
Where have you got these from?
The internet. Some people I follow.
Okay.
Some are books that I have not read but know are popular in the sales world, and I have the gist of.
Yep.
Mix of those. Just shit I've seen that I reckon a lot of other people are following.
So what do you want me to do? Just to say whether they're...
I want to know whether they're legit or not. So the first one, right, I know your answer here because it's Hormozi's closer framework.
Yep.
You think that's pretty legit?
I think it's legit. I think a lot of people, some people don't really like Alex Hormozi. I know he's American and, Americans have a different approach sometimes to sales, but I think it's just nice and simple. And I think it kind of lays out a framework for people to follow. And I think it works. Yeah.
Amazing. The assumptive close.
We talked about the assumptive close. I think you can do that if you've built the relationship with the client or with the prospect whereby they just feel completely safe with you and they feel like that you're going to deliver and you've given them the certainty. I think, in sales, it's all about giving your buyer certainty that you can deliver for them. If you can think about everything that you do through the lens of how can I give this person certainty, then assuming the sale later on is just very easy.
Nice. What about teach, don't sell? So people's philosophy that you don't need to sell, you just educate.
Yeah, I don't like that approach. It's just, I think people will hear that from the response to that last question that I answered. I don't really like educating live on the sales call. I think they should be already educated before they get on the sales call of how you solve the problem and what the problem is and what, why it would be great for them to what life will be like after that's solved. So yeah, I don't necessarily agree with the approach of let's get on the sales call. I'll tell you all of the information, then you go away and get you go away and make a decision. I just don't think that works.
Yeah. Reframing objections as questions to the prospect.
Yeah, so I love that. I think, like I said earlier, I never answer an objection. I never just answer an objection. I always get them to clarify. So that is reframing with questions, essentially. So if somebody says something to me, along the lines of an objection, I will always get them to clarify. And that is by asking, multiple questions to get to the root of the problem of why they're actually asking that.
Love it. And then final one, gap selling.
Gap selling, I mean, I think I don't know too much about gap selling other than the fact that I think it's really just like where they are now, where they want to be, and how you position yourself as the solution. So like I said earlier, positioning yourself as the bridge. I think that's what gap selling is. But if it is that, then yeah, I think it's legit.
Love it. Awesome. Well, Francis, thank you so much for coming on the pod. This has been absolute gold. It's been a masterclass in sales. I've certainly learnt a lot in this session, and I've learnt a lot from you previously as well. So I appreciate your time.
I appreciate you having me on, Sam.
Coming and sharing the value with us. Where's the best place for people to check you out if they want to see more of your work?
I'm on all social media, so YouTube, long form, X, Instagram. I'm also got my website, thesalesaudit.com as well. But yeah, just any of my social media really.
They'll be linked in the show notes, so make sure you check those out, guys. I asked Francis to come on because I'm such an advocate of his work and I think he's brilliant. So make sure you do check those out.